Yes. So just step away from Step away.
Don't touch
from
Don't touch
me.
him. Don't touch him.
Step away from me.
If you touch him, then you are going to jail. Simple as that.
In the cold, sterile light of a late-night parking garage, a situation spiraled rapidly out of control. What began as a call for medical assistance was quickly descending into a tense standoff, pitting a distressed young woman against the very people sent to help her. The scene was chaotic, a tableau of confusion and rising tempers. On the ground sat Bella, her body language a clear signal of defiance against the uniformed officers surrounding her. Her friend, a young man named Kevin, stood by, his own panic adding another layer of volatility to the encounter. The air was thick with misunderstanding, a prelude to a confrontation that would have lasting consequences. It all started just moments before, when the first responders arrived to a perplexing scene. They found Bella lying motionless on the concrete floor, with Kevin frantically trying to explain the situation to an officer whose body camera was already rolling, capturing every disjointed word. The officer's initial questions were standard procedure, an attempt to cut through the noise and establish a baseline of fact. He wanted to know who they were, what had happened, and most importantly, if Bella was breathing. Kevin, however, was a vortex of anxiety. His focus was split between his friend's alarming condition and another, stranger problem: his car had vanished. He explained that he had parked it right there, and now it was simply gone. This bizarre detail immediately complicated the narrative. To the officer, Kevin's frantic talk of a missing car sounded like a distraction, a potential sign of intoxication or dishonesty. He pressed Kevin for details, asking for his name and his relationship to the woman on the floor. Kevin confirmed they were just friends, but his agitated state made him a less than reliable narrator. The officer's skepticism was palpable as he tried to redirect Kevin's attention back to the immediate crisis: his friend lying vulnerable on the parking garage floor. He pointed out that Kevin's priorities seemed skewed, a detail that did not escape the officer's notice.
I put my thing.
Did she take any drugs
Now
tonight?
it's like my car's gone.
She's not in trouble if you say yes, but did she take any drugs
I
tonight?
don't know. My car is gone.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out.
The officer's patience was clearly wearing thin. He found Kevin's behavior deeply strange, a confusing mix of genuine concern and what appeared to be evasiveness. He couldn't get a straight answer as to why Bella was in this state. Was she drunk? Had she taken drugs? Kevin's responses were a frustrating loop of "I don't know" and more panicked statements about his missing vehicle. He seemed to believe Bella wasn't in any real trouble, a claim that stood in stark contrast to the reality of her being passed out on the ground. The officer tried to impress upon him the gravity of the situation, that the immediate priority was the young woman's well-being, not a misplaced car. But Kevin, trapped in his own bubble of stress, couldn't seem to grasp this. He gestured around the garage, his hands flailing as he tried to explain the timeline of events, how long he'd paid for parking, and his certainty about where he had left the vehicle. His inability to provide a coherent account only deepened the officer's suspicion and isolated him as a useful ally in helping Bella. The focus of the emergency personnel began to shift away from him and onto the woman at the center of the crisis. As the officers turned their full attention to Bella, they attempted to establish communication. One knelt down, his voice calm, asking for her name. After a moment of silence, she mumbled a response: "Bella." They asked if she could sit up, trying to assess her level of consciousness. For a few moments she remained limp, seemingly asleep or unconscious. But as they persisted, a shift occurred. The officer's gloved hand reached out to check on her, a standard part of a medical evaluation. This simple act of touching her was the catalyst that ignited the situation. Bella's eyes flew open, and her body recoiled violently. She pushed the officer's hand away, her face twisting from a mask of passivity into one of active distress and fear. It was the first clear sign that this would not be a simple case of assisting an intoxicated person. Her reaction was visceral and immediate, a clear and unambiguous rejection of their help.
That's where I'm at.
Bella's sudden resistance changed the entire dynamic. The officers, who were initially trying to provide medical aid, were now faced with a potentially combative individual. They tried to reason with her, explaining that they were there to help, to make sure she was okay. They asked her again, "Do you want them to check on you, or are you just being difficult?" But Bella was no longer listening to their words. She was trapped in a state of high anxiety. She began speaking, her voice trembling but firm, explaining that she had been through this before. Her words hinted at past traumas, experiences that had taught her to fear situations just like this one. Meanwhile, the lead officer made a final assessment of Kevin. Concluding that Kevin was also intoxicated, he deemed him incapable of taking care of Bella. The officer was firm, stating he needed a sober family member, a roommate, someone responsible to take custody of her. With Kevin effectively sidelined, Bella was left to face the authorities alone, her protective barrier now gone. This decision removed any possibility of de-escalation through her friend and placed Bella directly in the hands of the state. The officers presented her with an ultimatum: she could either cooperate and find a sober friend to pick her up, or her only other option was a trip to the hospital. For Bella, neither was acceptable. Her agitation grew into a full-blown panic attack. She began to shout, her voice echoing through the empty garage. She demanded that everyone leave her alone, that they get out of her face. She accused them of being there only for their own purposes, perhaps for money or to meet a quota, not out of genuine concern for her. Her words were a torrent of fear and anger. It became clear this wasn't just about intoxication, it was about a profound and overwhelming anxiety. She tried to explain that having people crowd around her, on top of her, was an unbearable trigger. She pleaded for them to back up, to give her space, but in the structured world of emergency response, her plea was interpreted as non-compliance. Her request for personal space was seen as obstructing their duties.
Back up. Just back up. Just back up. I have too many people on me right now. I have really bad anxiety. Alright? And when I have people on me, I don't like it. I don't like people.
Her desperation peaked. As an officer moved, possibly to speak with Kevin, Bella's protective instincts flared. She saw the movement as a threat not just to herself, but to her friend. This is when she issued her stark warning, the one that would later form the basis of a criminal charge. She commanded the officer not to touch him, threatening that if he did, he would be the one going to jail. It was a desperate, powerless person's attempt to reclaim some control over a situation in which she had none. The officers, however, saw it as a direct challenge to their authority. The line had been crossed. The lead officer informed her that the game was over. He stated plainly that she couldn't even walk or control herself, and that she was now going with them, one way or another. The decision was made. They moved in with a gurney and restraint. The attempt at communication had failed, and now, force was the only remaining option on their flowchart. The final phase of the encounter was swift and clinical. As they tried to lift her onto the gurney, Bella resisted with all her remaining strength. Officers had to physically control her, strapping her legs and feet to the board to prevent her from kicking or struggling free. It was a distressing sight, a complete physical overpowering of a person who was clearly in the throes of a severe emotional and psychological crisis. Once she was secured, a neck brace was fitted, and she was wheeled out of the garage, her protests now muffled and futile. She was no longer a person in need of help, but a subject to be transported. Kevin was left behind, defeated and helpless, trying to explain to the remaining officer how quickly everything had fallen apart. He gestured futilely, still trying to make sense of the missing car and the traumatic intervention that had just occurred before his eyes. His best friend was gone, taken away in a manner that felt more like an arrest than a rescue.
Don't,
Alright.
don't touch me right now.
Stop.
Don't touch me.
The aftermath of that night in the parking garage extended far beyond the curb. For her actions, for her panicked resistance born of overwhelming anxiety, Bella was formally charged with 2 serious crimes. The official record would show her mugshot next to the stark, unforgiving text, battery on a law enforcement officer and resisting an officer without violence. The narrative of a young woman in crisis had been officially reframed into the narrative of a criminal. Her fear, her pleas for space, and her desperate attempts to control her environment were all translated into acts of aggression against the state. The system had processed the chaotic events of that night and produced a simple, damning verdict.
I think he parked somewhere else, but we can look around.
Anna was charged with battery on law enforcement.
It seemed like a straightforward case. The body camera footage would show her struggling, it would capture her threatening word. By all accounts, she was guilty as charged. But the story had one final, unexpected turn. When the case finally reached a judge, away from the heat and pressure of the moment, the official narrative collapsed. After reviewing the evidence, the context, and the circumstances of that night, the judge saw something different. It wasn't a crime scene, it was a cry for help that had been mishandled. In a quiet act of judicial discretion, both charges against Bella were dropped. The case was dismissed. The system that had so quickly labeled her a criminal ultimately, and quietly, acknowledged its own failure to see the human being at the heart of the crisis.